Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is William Harvey. He is a manufacturing executive. He is also a university professor whose career is defined by developing people, strengthening systems, and driving organizational excellence. He's a U.S. Marine celebrating recently the Corps' 250th birthday here in 2025, and he carries forward a tradition of service and leadership. And also mentioned William is going to be serving as the AME annual conference, International Conference, Association for Manufacturing Excellence, is being held in Milwaukee in 2026. And he is the chair. And that is an organization I've also been involved in. And William is a friend of mine here from the Cincinnati area. So welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thank you for having me today. It's perhaps one of the most freeing things to share your mistakes publicly and to get them out and say, look at all the lessons I've learned since then. So happy to join you today.
Yeah, well, thank you. You've got this audience for doing that. And, we're going to have a chance to talk about building a workplace culture, about learning from mistakes and continuous improvement. I'm sure we'll hear more from you about mistakes and things that you do that work in terms of leading an organization and driving continuous improvement. So, as we always do here, and I know you're prepped for this, what's your favorite mistake?
Yeah, Mark. So I'll take you back to an early job out of the Marine Corps. I was working as a shipping supervisor for a third-party logistics company. And like any organization, you're trying to solve business problems. And one of the specific business problems we had was related to damaged product being received at the customer site. So these products would go through the mail to somebody's doorstep and eventually arrive broken. And you can just imagine discouragement when you open a package and it's broken. So a lot of our team was working on that for the problems we were faced with. And this first season that we were going through, peak season, which is this time between November 1st and December 23rd-ish, we go from a volume increase from X to Y, and it is massive. It's a 10X, 15X increase depending upon the day. So quite a bit more work. And I thought it really wise one day because I was trying to protect the customer. And in this instance, I said, I'll put this package that needs to get some extra attention because it was very fragile. I put it away and I did something really silly. I took the pick slip, which is the part that will tell you what the package and send to the customer, home with me that evening. Thought I'll work on it tomorrow. We're working 12-hour shifts. We're working extra hours before and after that as a supervisor. And the very next morning, I come only to find the package is missing. I scramble really quick. I can fix this, only to realize in this very moment that all of the products that I could put together were in that package. And there is no way within that warehouse to get our product to the customer. That just really opened up a wonderful conversation. So I, at this point, think I'm fired. I go to my manager and I say, Steve, I've made a mistake. Steve was kind. Steve didn't overreact to the situation. So that's that first bit that was really incredible for me.
Uh-huh.
And then the second part that I would share with you is we had an on-site customer. And in this case, the on-site customer contact more specifically shared with me, let's see what we can do. And in this story, Jim went through these amazing hoops to try to honor what the customer was getting at. And so I go from this point where I feel like I've made this major error. This is my last day at the company. I realized like how kind my manager was to this customer intimacy thing, framed it in a much different way. So for me, as I started to think about like this guy was willing to drive from Northern Kentucky into Minnesota on the 22nd, 23rd of December. And he said, let's check all of the warehouses between here and there, and or more specifically the stores for this brand all the way to Milwaukee, up through Minnesota. And I thought, this is incredible. This guy's going to drive on a holiday.
Huh.
And that was really just a key takeaway for me for so many reasons. And as I think about the lessons learned from my manager's treatment of me all the way through, what does that really mean to be customer intimate? Really just framed the world a little bit differently after that.
Oh, I'm glad it didn't lead you being fired.
Absolutely.
A lot to unpack from the story there. And, I think it's important to be careful. And I say this to remind myself this as much as anything about, labeling a mistake as silly, or, I mean, what was the thought process at the time? You were trying to do something helpful. I mean, it seemed like a good thing to do. kind of talks to the thought process of taking that pick slip home. That was not part of the normal process, I'm guessing.
No, the normal process is this should have been left for the next group to take care of. And this really just showed really my lack of trust in the process
Oh,
at the time. And I thought, well, certainly I've been working with the people that have been talking about this problem, so I know how best to solve it. I'll work tomorrow with my team. I know exactly what we need to do to get this to the customer. And in that conversation, it was one of those things where I thought the intent was the intent was positive. I thought we could take care of it tomorrow. I said, nobody will go down here and get this thing.
yeah.
So in certain ways, I hid it away thinking nobody will dig this deep tonight to find what I've basically put away for myself tomorrow. And that night, the team that followed me cleared out the house. There was not a package left the next morning. And that's when I was like, oh no, I've made this mistake.
And I hear you saying it was a mistake to not trust the team. I guess was one of the takeaways.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And you'll see that I think in a lot of ways, that's why it became a favorite mistake, because it was what was missing in me with the team that I was partnered with. Why didn't I trust that second shift team? Really just highlighted the process gaps for me about what's going on between A and B. And as much as I could deflect in that story, it was really just a reflection of me. I said, I got to figure out a different approach to this because this isn't the best answer. And of course, the trust or the lack of trust in people really just led to that mistake being so valuable for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, you shouldn't have taken the pick slip home. What do you think happened to the package that was missing a pick slip? Was there did somebody else maybe try to do the right thing or deviate from the process? Did you have a suspicion of what happened, or did you ever confirm that?
So what we believe happened was that when somebody found it without the pick slip, the individual parts were put back in the areas to be picked for a future order.
Okay.
In this case, one big order became maybe 7 or 8 small orders. And at that point, that's where the inventory was likely to go. And that's what the forensic analysis of the data would share. It was like we added to inventory, then we shipped it. So that's most likely what happened.
Okay. And so then that's why that customer in particular became the search to try to find
Yes.
what they needed. Okay. Okay. I've got that now. And then, you were worried, that you would get fired or punished had that been demonstrated in other ways within the organization, or was it just a fear of, even if you hadn't seen that, others get fired for a mistake, you thought, oh, that could happen to me. Was it really do you think an outlier that your boss was kind, or did you learn, was that part of a pattern?
I think this is what part where you carry some of the prior lessons with you.
Mhm.
So in the Marine Corps, I was regarded as a high performer. I didn't make a lot of mistakes. And if I did, I was able to pick up with them pretty quickly. So I think going to that next organization, just watching what happened from the Marine Corps was probably more weighing on me than what was actually happening at the organization I was at the time. So it wasn't that my manager was unkind. It was just in my head, oh my God, I made this mistake. And I'm carrying the weight of that lack of trust. I'm carrying the weight of I've deviated from the process in my head.
Yeah.
And at the grand scheme, it's probably not that big of a deal to one customer one time, but in my head, it was the most momentous failure ever that turned into that person, Jim, in this story saying, let's do everything we can. I said, okay, so it is this momentous. It's just the way I'm framing it. At the time, I was really harsh on myself. And it probably wasn't until 20 years later that I realized that maybe some grace to myself is what I needed,
Yeah.
not to be so harsh on myself, because when you look at it, you say, this is absolutely a mistake. However, we can make this right. Unfortunately, we're just going to be late to getting this order out to the customer.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you credit for, I mean, I don't know if honor is the right word, if there was a sense of honor to say, well, to admit the mistake, even though you were afraid of repercussions. I mean, I imagine it might have been possible, or it just would have been a mystery without you admitting your role in that, right? I mean, I imagine your boss appreciated, if not admired, like, okay, well, you did the right thing to speak up, even if it puts yourself at risk, right?
I hope so. And I think not because I say honor is the best word here, but because honor is one of the core values of the Marine Corps. So in a positive sense, right, that's really coming
Right.
out like I need to go say something because
Yeah.
I did this. This wasn't somebody else. And there is a chance still to make it right. I just didn't know how to solve the problem myself. So
Right.
thanks to Steve, thanks to Jim, So we ultimately ended up being late with what we were trying to achieve. But at the same time, the way they each treated me in that moment wasn't to blame. It was really just to say, let's figure out what we can do to solve it. So in that world, it was really nice because I'm young at this time and don't really have a lot of understanding of how the world works.
Yeah.
And then it becomes one of those things that say, well, what's going to happen? This has never happened. I've never really been in corporate America at this time. So I didn't really have a good understanding of what was going on.
Yeah. And, maybe this is a good segue to the lessons that you took away from this, being in leadership roles. Like your story, in a way, reminds me of stories. If you didn't listen to the episodes, you've heard me retell the stories, I think, of two previous guests who made mistakes at Toyota. Asao Yoshino, who made a mistake, had systemic causes, but he made a mistake in Japan in the 1960s. And then David Meyer, a little closer to home in Georgetown, Kentucky, similar story in the 1980s. And they both feared, they were both new to the company. They feared they would get punished, and they learned a lesson, a valuable lesson of, well, this is how the company, this is how people here respond to situations like that. And it taught them that lesson about being a leader. I'd be curious to hear some of your reflections just on that opportunity to then model that same behavior later. I mean, do you remember the first time or one of the first times an employee admitted a mistake to you when the tables were turned, maybe?
I think that was really where the story becomes super positive, right? So for me, there was that sense of vulnerability, right? I'm walking into my manager's office saying I screwed up. What I learned in that moment, that's where trust is built for me. And I know from your work specifically, it was a lesson learned, maybe simultaneous to reading the book. Maybe it came together in a different way, but really saying leaders admit mistakes first.
Mhm.
So one of the things that's been really important for me in my work practice is a concept called Toyota Kata, which in so many ways comes out of the Toyota organization that really helps the mentors and the mentees get together and view the experimentation process not as a failure, but as just a lesson along the way to learning about the problem that we're trying to solve together. So to me, that was really foundational because it shifted the way I viewed what was a failure for me and just saying, well, I can't know everything. It's okay.
Mm.
But I can make an educated hypothesis. I can go experiment. And where that turned for me was when people would come into the organization, and I'm fast forwarding now about 20 years in this story, the folks who come in, mostly not experiencing the David Meyer story or the Sal Yoshino stories, but coming from some really fear-based workplaces. And here's me saying, it's okay to be wrong. Let's write down what we think is going to happen. And let's come back to this and have a coaching cycle. Not because I was trying to get the person to be right, but because the reality was none of us knew. And one that really I would say stands out for me is it's day one for a person in this new role. So you can't really blame him, but I can just imagine him going through and
Yeah.
just saying, we made this major mistake as an organization. And really highly regarded person in this story comes to me and says, we've got this major equipment breakdown. And by major, this piece of equipment isn't going to run for the next month. There's no doubt that this is major to our customer. This is major to our business because it was really disruptive in lots of ways. But in that moment, there was that chance to show up in one of two ways, right? Do I show up like Steve, who was that story from 20 years ago? Or do I show up in some of the horror stories that many people can probably reflect on? It was really modeling what Steve did for me, what some of those leaders with David and Isao Yoshino shared. It was really just saying, show up in a different way when this is presented to me. So I think it's not so much about the mistake, but what is the leader's response in that moment? And if it's one of judgment, then it's not helpful from my perspective. And if I really want to achieve what is really my goal in life is this idea of psychological safety, where people are coming all the way up, challenging the ideas and the ways that we work, challenging the ideas that maybe this isn't the most safe physically or psychologically. And that really has been let's say the goal that I've been aiming for rather than trying to deal with individual issues. But I could count many stories where people would say, I made a mistake. And it's really just been trying to reflect back on how did Steve treat me that day? And have, let's say, just a lot of admiration for Steve, but also hopefully inspiring generations in the future that create a more safe workspace and a more psychologically safe workspace at the same time.
Yeah. It's, I think, a real challenge when somebody is new to an organization. They bring their past experiences with them. And we've run across this at KaiNexus, the software company, where we have a reasonably high degree of psychological safety. People admit mistakes. It's been pretty well demonstrated. People don't get punished for them. Like you're saying, William, we focus on learning and sharing and future prevention. Our CEO, co-founder, Greg Jacobson, who's been on this podcast, he readily admits mistakes, and that sets a good tone. But when we hire somebody from the outside, they've maybe left the previous company for all the reasons. And that one reason might be that there was a track record of not being treated as well. And, we've learned, even as much as we try to emphasize this is how we generally behave here, it's not like you can flip a switch and realize like, oh, I'm safe now. People, they can learn through their own experiences of what they're observing or how they're being treated. So yeah, that resonates with me. Like you can't just say you should feel safe. So to that point, I mean, other than admitting your mistakes yourself and encouraging others to speak up, what are some of the things you would do if somebody was new to your organization to at least help them feel safe enough to take a chance about speaking up on something?
There's a bunch of different ways, but I'd say the thing that comes to me is go first as the leader. So it used to be like, hey, just share your stories and try to take a risk, but people don't have that comfort for any number of reasons. And even if they came from a really good space, like people entering a second workplace in the story are trying to figure out, how do I get along in this organization? Because in that first 90 days, 180 days, people want to make a good impression, and for good reason. So part of it for me is just being along with them for the journey. And I don't think I could ever find a more valuable way than to just go to the workplace with people that we're engaged with, really just explore their thinking. And I think in that exploration of thinking, it's like, I see the same problem as you. Let's figure out what we could do together. And through that Toyota Kata coaching method, it's really designed to solicit that person's creativity, put their ideas out there. And in many ways, acting as the coach in those moments, I'm signing off saying, I'm accepting this risk for this person. And as I think about accepting that risk, that's probably the one that sticks out to me the most, because I sense a lot of people worry about the what ifs that go wrong. My life experience tells me the time I've wasted my energy on thinking about what ifs doesn't get you to taking action. So in that experimenting phase, it's really just saying, let's get together. Let's make sure it makes sense together. And then let's go try it and come back as soon as we can to learn what happened. And I think it's through those repetitive cycles, it helps. Secondly, when we have or thirdly, I should say, coming into the story where you have people that are talking about this problem, if you will, it's showing public support for that person. So, I was there, I made that decision. I was the one that said this was a great experiment. Even if that person came up with it, I didn't know, it's still the burden of the leader in my mind to say, that was me. I let it happen. And not only that, I encouraged it in these coaching sessions. So I think by accepting some of that stress in the beginning is really where you can get people to engage and perhaps feel more safe. And I would just say that's a daily exercise. So that's not something I can just do one coaching cycle at day 74. It's 75, 79, all the way through the nth degree, and making sure people feel that way.
Yeah. I know one other viewpoint we share in common is, the importance of, focusing on physical safety in the workplace. And I was wondering if you could, share just, a little bit more about that mindset and that priority, and, connections or even examples around, psychological safety leading to improved physical safety.
I'll say for me, Mark, I'll put it in the lead with physical safety to get to psychological safety. So an inspiration that came to me was learning about this story of a gentleman named Paul O'Neill, the CEO of a steel company. And
So just as a minor mistake, sorry, aluminum company.
Aluminum.
Alcoa.
Okay, sorry.
Alcoa.
Thank you for that correction.
Sorry.
Yeah, Alcoa, not steel company. Thank you.
Yeah.
And in that story, the way that it's presented to me is he goes to the board, says, this is my plan. And at the very beginning, it was talking about safety.
Yeah.
And most people that have ever been at a board meeting would say that's maybe not what they hear in the conversation, but this is where Paul led. And in this story, I thought it was really impactful of what he was doing. He wanted certain phone calls at certain hours. about where within a certain number of hours about major incidents happening. And then that changed the way in which the world or his world perceived the work in worker safety. And what ended up being true in the story, not only did they get really incredible results from a safety perspective, they started getting more ideas, they started making more money, they started creating a different type of culture on the psychological side. And I've been fortunate at two companies supported by two really amazing different CEOs. One is Ian, one is Rick. And at both places, I realized one of the metrics that was really broken. Let's talk about how many people got hurt yesterday. I thought this just makes zero sense to me.
Mhm.
What is a better answer? And in both my current company and a prior company, became one of those conversations that we called proactive safety. And within this, it's not monumental, but it's certainly a shift in the work. How do you go and educate the workforce about what does cause issues and elevate their risk acceptance and understanding, if you will, or lower their risk acceptance, but
Right.
elevate the risk understanding? And in that story, it became one of those things where year after year, we're getting better and better at it. And in my current company, we have this specific challenge, not unique to companies, but we have people that work in factories, we have people that travel, we have people that work at home, and of course, we have people that work in offices. Well, then it became, well, how do you elevate risk awareness and partner with a couple of my coworkers here, coming up with ideas to get that out in front of people, really just elevate everybody's game. And just the elevation isn't important. It's what is management's response immediately after that event. So we lead every meeting from our daily direction setting to say, do we have any immediate concern reports that need addressed today?
Yeah.
Really just highlighting that's the second question of the day after, do we have any current problems? And it gets into this situation of saying, okay, management is listening, they're fixing problems. And for me, the safety aspect of it leads to people challenging the status quo,
Mhm.
offering new ideas, and leading to more and more improvements. And to me, it's just the self-reinforcing cycle that just gives and gives and gives. And I haven't seen a bad side of this story yet, other than maybe an overwhelmed maintenance team trying to respond to all the inquiries that come in when you first start this.
Yeah.
But I think the shift is monumental. And perhaps just like Paul saw, I've been able to see at this company and a previous company.
Mhm. Yeah. The Paul O'Neill story is powerful. It's documented in places including Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. There's a lot of videos of Paul O'Neill. He passed away a couple of years ago. I had the good fortune of meeting him a couple of times and hearing him speak and working with people that worked with him closely at Alcoa and after he retired from Alcoa and was doing a lot of advocacy work in healthcare around these issues. But as he told it, when Paul O'Neill was talking to his board, to the Wall Street analysts, like, he was pretty blunt. He said, like, the Wall Street analysts thought he was bonkers for talking about safety before he was talking about growth and technologies and international markets and all the strategic things they expect a CEO to talk about. But, I think the one thing he was really poking at was a mistake that people make of assuming safety and efficiency are inherently opposed or that there are trade-offs. And, he demonstrated that's not true. He demonstrated that dramatic safety improvement, at least correlated with huge increases in the stock price. It's not like he was killing the company by focusing on safety. It all went hand in hand. And I think another thing I'd invite you to comment on was, for all of your focus on problem solving and continuous improvement, Paul O'Neill made the argument that to develop the habits that we need to become world class when it comes to physical safety, those are going to be the same skills that allow us to solve all of the other problems in the business to allow us to become world class, or as he dubbed it, habitual excellence. So I'm curious your thoughts on those connections of, maybe saying, well, this is the right or honorable thing to do, but there are also, there can also be huge business benefits.
I think it starts with a very fundamental idea that I value your life, I value your health, I value your safety.
Yeah.
And in organizations where you don't feel that way about your leaders, I don't think you can show up and do your best work at any of those organizations. So I genuinely want my manager to care about me as a human being. So I think that's where it starts.
Yeah.
And what structurally happens in the places I've seen this work, you get really good at defining what you're trying to aim for. And I'll use this phrase, run the target. So what does it mean to be safe? You get people speaking in common language about what safe looks like with these actions. You get people to stop and think through problems. Is there a different way? I think those are universal in problem solving. They'll come by different names, but ultimately really result in the same thing. And what I've seen is it translates directly to quality improvement. And I hold this basic idea that there's no less expensive way than to do it right the first time. So it's inherent that these two come together so well, because when I think about this improvement in quality that's based on the improvement in safety, you naturally are more consistent, deliver on time. And then because of that, you're able to position your sales team, your finance teams in much better positions from a cost competitiveness perspective. And because we reduced so many of those challenges with safety at the beginning, which is where we started, the thinking just permeates. So for me, my experience is mirror calls,
Uh-huh.
where you end up in this position saying it flows through all. And the same thinking that solves the safety problem to me is the same one that solves the cost competitiveness problem.
Yeah.
Call it different words, different team members will be engaged, but that there's an underlying pattern that seems to be consistent throughout.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, I early in my career worked in a couple of manufacturing settings where there probably were trade-offs where if somebody was trying to be more efficient in a way that was maybe, more a matter of cutting corners, that would lead to increased safety risk or injuries. Or I remember one time, it was a non-factory I was an employee of, but walking through a factory that had relatively dangerous equipment, metal cutting machinery, and people had removed safety guarding from the equipment and circumventing, different safety measures. And so part of me, without it's going to sound judgmental, I'll say it anyway. Like how do leaders how do they let that happen? Because I mean, obviously the employees care about their own safety, but when they're pressured to hit productivity numbers above all else, and there's fear and blame and punishment, people will sadly do things that put themselves in jeopardy. So I think, what we've experienced when it comes to continuous improvement methodologies, like when we can actually improve productivity and quality by making work easier and safer and improving the processes instead of just pressuring people, now we've eliminated those trade-offs between, let's say, safety and efficiency. We challenge ourselves to find the better efficiency. What are your thoughts or experiences around trying to, convince people those trade-offs aren't inherent, or if we go about it a different way?
So I don't know that I've ever had to deal with the conversation of should we do A or B.
Uh-huh.
I think it just goes back to being in positions as a senior leader of these manufacturing sites where I can really set that expectation.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes through that daily execution, like you're talking. But the one thing that I would say is, at least highlighted for me, I start with the value that people are good. Been teaching now for 9 years, and I see this coming up through every student group that I get a chance to teach. And what I see in the workplace is no different, that when people feel safe and they really focus on the quality of the work.
Mhm.
And I don't have to say anything other than, this is what we're aiming for as a team. And what I found is people will spend inordinate amounts of time trying to make the work. And I think that just goes to some very root thing that we all want to have pride in our work and do well.
Yeah.
So when I hear the leader espousing pride in your work, I'd say, well, what is missing to where you even need to say that? Because I think that's the natural
Right.
state of humans.
Right.
So then it becomes this conversation of saying, okay, well, how do you remove the barriers physically and mentally that enable people to get there? And if leadership focuses on that, I think you can create an environment at which people can be really successful.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to pick your brain on, another thing Paul O'Neill really emphasized was the importance of, because we care about people and we don't want anybody getting hurt. He would say it's a mistake to have non-zero goals for the number of incidents or accidents or injuries or deaths. In fact, no, I slipped up. I used the correct word from his standpoint the first time. He said, "Don't call them accidents because that makes it sound like they were bound to happen." He said, "Call them incidents." So I got that word correct the first time. But setting goals of zero for incidents, injuries, deaths. And I try to pick up that cause. I worked for a company where, you mentioned non-factory settings. Like, when I worked for I'll say Johnson because I've blogged about this. the most dangerous job for anybody working at Johnson and Johnson was anybody driving a car on behalf of Johnson and Johnson. Not because they had dangerous drivers, it's just the factories had gotten relatively like very safe, and you can't control what other people do on the roads. And so to their credit, they were proactive. Like they put us through driver training when we had a company vehicle. They did, I think in a good way, put the fear into us of like, if you're in a collision, we are going to check your cell phone records. This was before smartphones even. But if you were on a call, you will be fired. I didn't think that was the worst feared. I mean, that was like a principled, do not drive in a distracted way kind of policy. But for the things I appreciated, I mean, we had discussions sometimes when I was on the safe driving committee of like, why are we setting a goal of, 7 point something accidents per month? I mean, like what, I mean, we want zero and we're aiming for zero. And as long as we're not punishing people, I mean, I think that would be a bad fear of like, well, if you reported an accident, now you're going to be fired. Like maybe you couldn't avoid reporting it because they would know the vehicle was damaged at some point. But if you know what I'm getting at in terms of like his argument that zero is only the right goal, and as long as we're helping people work toward that, it's okay to have that goal. What are your thoughts on zero versus other goals?
So not because I just try to follow Paul's specific mission, but I'm definitely a zero person. And the simple answer, I was like, okay, then tell me who gets to get hurt this year. Who needs to get hurt this week?
Yeah.
Why? Well, 1 out of 8, like 1 out of 8 seems insane, or 1 out of 800 seems insane, whatever number you want to come up with. Because at some point, I'm allowing and accepting that an unsafe condition could be present. And one of the prevailing myths, as I'll call it, is that all accidents are preventable. There are in these conversations of saying, maybe they're not, but if I say in certain ways that they are preventable, it's just my mindset and approach. I say, well, how do I build a system? Because some incidents, in this case, not accidents, will occur because there are things like lightning strikes. There's going to be certain things like they're certainly outside of my experience. But at the same time, my mindset shifted to say, okay, if you say they're all preventable, what I've seen is not that it's disagreeable to say something that you should be able to prevent them. It's the response is people start to react a certain way. And they're less, I'd say, focused. And it's this weird thing that I've seen in my 20-year manufacturing career where people say that and the actions don't line up. So one of the pieces I would share that may be controversial in the best of ways was interviewing years ago. And the person interviewing me said, can you rank safety, quality, delivery, cost, morale, and inventory in order that is important to you? And I thought about it for a moment and I shared with them, I would put quality followed by safety and whatever the trailing number was. He said, that's really interesting. Nobody ever says quality first. Why did you say that? We should lead with safety. I said, it's not that I say we shouldn't lead with safety. I said, I've never seen a safety incident where the poor quality wasn't at the root of something. So there was insufficient engineering. There was a bad assumption that went into the design. There's something that we missed, right? And I don't mean this to say that safety shouldn't be prioritized in our work and our thinking, but I've not found a safety incident that occurred just on its own. So there's this weird dichotomy where I go, well, you say all accidents are preventable, like, but are they? And are you doing anything about it in the way that it works? So it's a really weird phenomenon for me in my mind as I grapple with this both and type thinking of, can you have both of these? Or are they all preventable? But I like the way of talking about them as incidents because it does reframe it. You go, well, what led up to that from a factual perspective more so than could William have done something different? Like maybe, but this did happen. So let's focus on what did happen, focus on the prevention of it.
Yeah. I mean, I hear SQDC, safety, quality, delivery, cost. And then, I think the one idea is safety is, Paul O'Neill would have said a precondition as opposed to a priority. Safety, quality, delivery, I mean, you could almost think of those as a grouping. That's better safety, better quality, better delivery leads to lower cost. So, I mean, I think putting the C last is maybe the most important part of that dynamic because we all know companies that are primarily cost focused or cost. Paul O'Neill said, as CEO, we will not let budget be an excuse for doing what we need to improve safety. Because it's probably just economically smart. It's cheaper to prevent the injury than it is to deal with the aftermath of an injury or worse, a death. But he didn't want to hear people saying like, "Oh, well, we've run out of budget for the year." And that wasn't giving people a blank check, but he was trying to eliminate some of the excuses that people might throw out when they were used to being pressured about budget first and foremost.
It is. I think if you like continue to expand that thinking, or at least my thinking on the which order do they come in, I agree with you. There's some foundational element of like how do you approach the work. So if you start with I value people rather than I prioritize people, that changes my thinking.
Yeah.
And then when I think about something that's been instrumental in my reframing of the world for all of my career, it's really understanding how do you define quality. And there are many definitions, but the one that I really appreciate is on target with minimum variance. And in that definition, that really puts safety in a different light for me. So I'm saying, okay, what does it mean to be safe at work today? What do we need to do? Because we know through engineering, we know through the processes we've developed together to get to the outcome that we're after, which is people going home. I'll give a shout out to a previous EHS manager that I worked with. He'd come to the same conclusion I did, which is we shouldn't send our people home necessarily like they came in. And our approach was, how do you send them home better informed,
Right.
better equipped? And just the number of stories in my current organization where you've been able to take something where somebody's sharing a story, very open about a mistake that they've made. I go, you know what? I need to go change something about the way I'm doing something in my house. It's just been incredible to translate that idea of on target with minimum variance to we now have safety being improved. We now have delivery being improved and all the other systems and processes that happen in any organization.
Yeah. And I appreciate your quality connection about systems and system design and setting people up for success. I think that same idea applies to quality, to all of those factors, and including safety. I think there's, unfortunately, there's some mindsets where people blame and say, well, if we have defects, it's because the workers don't care. If we have people getting injured, it's because they're careless, or again, well, different way of saying, well, they don't care. When, and I think of situations where, I've seen in hospitals, pharmacy robot, big swinging arm robot inside of a cage and enclosure. And there were multiple warning signs saying basically, do not start the robot when people are inside the cage. And I kind of flipped out. I'm like, why is that even possible? Lockout, tag out in manufacturing.
Absolutely. Yes.
Address that. And you can control whether you have a lockout, tag out process, which I thought that should be, if that's not required by law, there would be penalties for not doing that. But there are things you can control, like making PPE available and eliminating the excuse of why people aren't wearing PPE. I mean, there are a lot of things that we do have control over. If not as individuals, there are system issues. Like if we're constantly running out of safety glasses, well, whose fault is it that the employees aren't wearing safety glasses? That's a systemic problem that somebody in management has to solve.
It is. And I think you highlighted a really important part in your story there, Mark, where if you can go into the robot cage while it's operating, there's an engineering control that's lost.
Yes.
That needs to be addressed well before you give somebody PPE, because be silly to say, well, just wrap some pillows around your arm and please and hit you. Like, I don't want PPE. I don't want you in the cage.
Yeah.
I think the number of times that people will get to the PPE argument, or can you just tell people not to with a sign, misses the point that you still have the hazard present. And then you got to go figure out why that's there. How do you protect people? And there's a really brief story I would just share with you. When I just think about the environment, this goes back 15 years ago, working in a factory, and this company did printing work. And one of the ways in which it would scrape the ink off, the excess ink, I should say more specifically, off of the printing cylinder, was this giant razor blade. And these giant razor blades would be stored on a specific cart that was in the back of the press area. It only was held up by 2 pins. And one of those 2 pins broke. And we ended up having a very serious injury that evening. Fortunately, that group was able to respond. But what it really highlighted for me, even that story, was we have something that didn't even appear dangerous to us that was out there lurking. So after that, there became a lot more emphasis throughout the organization. So even if I said I made a mistake, I think the key takeaway in this is, how do I share that broadly with people so you don't have that same situation repeating elsewhere? And I've been fortunate to partner with some engineers coming through a local university, not the one I work at, But even talking through that, just saying, okay, guys, look, you got to look at all of these things. And the number of deaths that write these stories and share the statistics is just sad.
Mhm.
So to me, it's really just saying, okay, can every organization, when they learn this lesson, share this with people?
Mhm.
And that to me is the second part of that. Like, so it's okay to make the mistake because we don't want to have deaths. At the same time, once it happens, you need to do your best to get out there. And you've got stories like Volvo giving away their safety knowledge. You've got people out there saying, okay, this could be patentable, but we're going to give it away because we need to, because it's going to make the world a better place. And I think when you think about these mistakes, mine might be simple and small in the sense of a pack slip where we started. But as I think about the future generations that come, my hope is through these conversations, the leaders I've been able to hang out with, they're inspiring this in future generations because work is getting more safe, not just in the US, but throughout the world.
Mhm.
And I think that is a testament to some of the people like Paul O'Neill who said, like, I'm going to go about this a different way and make the world the way that he wanted to see it come together.
Yeah. That's a great point. So William, thank you for sharing your story, having I think a really nice conversation about all of that. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask you to share a little bit about almost a year away here, the AME International Conference 2026 up in Milwaukee. Tell us a little bit about the organization, the conference, who typically attends.
Yeah. So the organization's just over 4 decades old. So it's titled the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, which made complete sense in the early 80s.
Yeah.
What we've seen over the last 40 years has been that this work that came out of manufacturing has went into all organizations. And it's perhaps a better titled continuous improvement focused conference more than just manufacturing excellence. So that's the first part I would share. So people coming from healthcare, people coming from government, people
Mhm.
coming from office type work, people, of course, coming from manufacturing, service industries, et cetera. And what we see is throughout this week, people engaged in different types of learning. The first day I would share is probably one of the really valuable specific things that people can get. There's roughly 15 to 20 different workshops that people can attend. And then on the Tuesday through Thursday, the really cool part that I've experienced personally is it's a very practitioner based approach to sharing what organizations are doing. So you don't get to hear a condensed or summarized version. You get to go out on tours with people to see their facilities. You, of course, get to hear from the presenters that are sharing their stories, their journeys. And one of the cool things that it seems like every session I'm in, people are talking about their mistakes, what they learned, and how you can advance. And one of the common misconceptions I hear is I need to be advanced to be there. The reality is some of these presenters are very early in their journey and some are very mature. So you're going to find lessons in both of those stories. And then when you get into what I think is really at the heart of this work is the people. And next year's conference has a theme called People First, Progress Together. The tagline is a yes and approach to enterprise excellence. And I think this really involves a lot of these discussions around how do you bring people together to solve really important problems and do work that matters. And within the AME conference, we're led by an all volunteer group for the conference committee that puts this event on. Of course, we're supported by this core group of 6 that always do AME events, not just that one, but many around the globe, not just in the local area. And it creates I'd say, a sense of community, lets people find new ways, and being practitioner based, just really insightful, take back and try at your workplace the very next day type of activities.
Yeah. So I encourage people to look for a link in the show notes. AME.org is the general website, and you can find information about the conference. It's a conference I've attended, not every single year, but I've gone to it a lot. There are a great number of wonderful people there. The networking and the conversations outside of the formally scheduled program really make that a great place to be. So again, highly recommended. So our guest again today, William Harvey. He's a manufacturing executive, university professor. I've learned not to make the mistake of saying anything other than William is a Marine. You don't say
Yes.
was or former. You are a Marine.
Very much so. And November 10th is the official day that 250 years is celebrated.
Wow.
And just throughout throughout the entire Marine Corps and everybody that's come before them, really big event in their history. So a lot of exciting things going on throughout the fall of 2025 and some stuff that came earlier this year with Marine Weeks throughout the US.
I think I made a mistake earlier when I think I alluded to it already happening, and I will admit my mistake. I was thinking of the Army's 250th birthday. My mistake. Sorry.
Yeah. They did come first, so I'll give them all the credit for that. Just
Yeah.
share the Marine Corps every year has something called the Marine Corps Ball. So think like a Cinderella ball, and it is just an amazing event. So excited to go with my wife, Amy. We're going here in a couple of weeks from the time we recorded this. So
Yeah.
really excited to see that again and experience the camaraderie that exists from all of those folks that have served before me, serve now, and will serve in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you, William. Thanks to all other Marines who are listening and people who have served in other branches. So thank you again for being a guest and for having a great chat here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.